Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another free third virtual Thursday program with the Foss Waterway Seaport. I am your virtual guide for the evening, Chris, and tonight we are diving into some of the unexplained and unsolved mysteries of Commencement Bay. For my Tacoma people, these will hit pretty close to home. So I am hoping that you guys are excited for this tonight. We've got a couple things to mention. First and foremost, right out the gate, this entire program is brought to you through the generous contributions of Columbia Bank, Port of Tacoma, and of course, Tacoma Creates. And that's a good lead into the fact that this is Arts Month here in Tacoma, a celebration of the arts throughout the area. And as a part of that, the Seaport series, let's see if I can get this focused in here, is doing this art tour punch card. So it features some local businesses. It's difficult to see here, but Stink Meat and Cheese, Comadre, which is the brand new kombucha bar on 6th Avenue. Of course, Social Bar and Grill, Ice Cream Social, Campfire Coffee, and the Seaport are all involved in this. And what you do is you can pick up one of these little arts tour passport punch cards from any of the locations listed here. And then you go around the city visiting each of them. If you make any purchase at any of these locations, they give you a stamp. You get all 5 stamps. You take this back to the Foss Waterway Seaport, turn it in, and you and your family get a free membership for the year. So really cool program. Very excited to be a part of that and to share that with you, because that's a cool way to get out and experience Tacoma, which, as you know, I'm all about. So let's check in really quick. Good to see you guys. I'm glad that you guys are all here tonight, and I am excited to share some of these with you. So if you have questions along the way, please let me know. But let's take a look at some of the truly bizarre experiences here in Tacoma. We're going to start a little light. I don't know if you guys have heard of this one before, but Tacoma has its own sea monster. And while I think this is an article from maybe the 1970s, 1980s, it doesn't really do justice to the story. But the first time that the Tacoma sea monster shows up is in 1893. A group of fishermen off of Point Defiance were going around in early July fishing for bass when they drop anchor and they camp on the shore over by Point Defiance to escape a strong wind, and an electric sea monster crawls out of the ocean. Now, it bears a striking resemblance to this sea monster pictured here, which was seen off of Port Townsend in Washington. But the description is as follows, and I'm quoting here. This monster fish, or whatever you call it, was fully 150 feet long, and at its thickest part, I should judge about 30 feet in circumference. Its shape was somewhat out of the ordinary insofar that the body was neither round nor flat, but oval. And from what we could see, the upper part of the body was covered with a very coarse hair. The head was shaped very much like the head of a walrus, though of course very much larger. Its eyes, of which it apparently had 6, were as large around as dinner plates and were exceedingly dull. And it was about the only spot on the monster that was at one time or another not illuminated. At intervals of about every 8 feet from its head to its tail, a substance that had the appearance of a copper band encircled its body, and it was from these many bands that the powerful electric current appeared to come. The bands nearest the head seemed to have the strongest electric force, and it was from the first 6 bands that the most brilliant lights were emitted. Near the center of its head were 2 large horn-like substances, though they could not have been of horns, for it was through them that the electrically charged water was thrown. Its tail, from what I could see, was shaped like a propeller and seemed to revolve. It may be possible that the strange monster pushes himself through the water by means of this propeller tail. Buckle up, my friends, because this is the most detailed account of an electric sea monster that cruises around Commencement Bay. And while the first account shows up in 1893, it is perpetuated throughout the years. And the first time it shows up, these fishermen, again, are on the shore out by Point Defiance, and they wake up in the middle of the night because one of them just senses something beached on the water. And when he looks out, this 150-foot long creature just suddenly erupts into light. They said that a blinding light was emitted across the entirety of the beach, and that the first guy who runs out towards this thing gets shocked by a spray of water from the horns that electrocutes the guy. Another fisherman runs in to check on his friend to see if he's okay, and a second stream of water is shot out, apparently electrified, that then sends him into an electric shock. The remaining fishermen sort of flee off into the woods, and they see this thing that they again describe as a 150-foot sea serpent haul itself over the beach and back into the water, where it disappears, and that they say that you could see the luminescence of the thing disappear into the deep for probably 100 yards off the shore. Now, both of the fishermen that were shocked end up recovering. There are no fatalities from this mysterious incident, but the story of the electric sea serpent becomes one that suddenly becomes lore throughout all of Commencement Bay. And like I said, it shows up again and again, but never with the same intensity. The picture that I've got for you right here is of a different electrically charged sea monster pulled out of Commencement Bay, but this one was only 20 feet long, significantly smaller than its older cousin that apparently was around in 1893. Now, while there have been multiple occurrences of people experiencing the sea monster throughout Commencement Bay, nobody has been able to pull anything out of the deep, although multiple fishermen off of Point Defiance in particular have said that they've experienced something incredibly large and with its own bioluminescence. I think for me, this is the part of the story that's the strangest and sticks the most, is that people who have been night fishing around Point Defiance have said that they've seen something that looks like the size of a whale just streak underwater underneath them, and that it has that sort of bioluminescence off of it, but that they think it was actually coming off of the creature, because there are we don't have the same bioluminescent creatures in the bay out here by Tacoma that we would experience around the rest of the world that might have the same sort of effect. Whatever it is, the sea serpent of Commencement Bay has begun to, I think, ratchet itself up higher and higher as far as the cryptozoology lore in the area. Certainly not as famous as Sasquatch, but definitely something that is out there. Oh, yeah, we found it online. It's really good stuff. So yeah, there's been a lot of things about possibly being a squid, or maybe something that just got involved in a lot of like other bioluminescence there. But the thing that all of the sea serpent accounts have had in common are that there is something electric about it. One of the most fantastical theories floated around since 1893 is that there could possibly have been some sort of early machine, some sort of early submarine craft that had been in the area out here. And from my personal standpoint on this whole thing, that seems like perhaps the most far-fetched of them all. And again, I'm including this in there with a 150-foot electricity shooting sea serpent out there. But whatever it is, each of these fishermen continued for the remainder of their life to swear up and down that exactly what they saw is what happened. And as we go through the accounts tonight, I think you'll notice that stories changing can sometimes be a big part of unsolved mysteries out here. But for the sea serpent, the fact that it remained unchanged is noteworthy for me. Now, I would like to also get you guys amped for tonight, because I managed to get, for those of you who have been on previous tours, famed diver and marine salvage expert Robert Mester to join me on a Zoom call. So we've got some of his answers, because he has been a big part of sort of uncovering the various mysteries of Puget Sound and Commencement Bay in particular. And so we're get to hear a little bit from him about some of the mysteries out here. But let's move on from sea serpents to one of the better documented cases of something strange happening in Commencement Bay. This takes place at 11:10 exactly on November 28th in 1894. 1 year after the electric sea serpent was spotted out in Commencement Bay, when a strip of land, approximately 300 yards long and 60 feet wide, slides into Commencement Bay. This is a picture taken of some of that wreckage, and you can see just in the top right of the photo there, sort of just below the Foss Waterway Seaport logo, that's the Northern Pacific building, which is on Pacific Avenue today, just across from Old City Hall. And this is a huge section of waterfront that just disappears. The Northern Pacific Railway headquarters is responsible for the majority of these buildings out here, and their warehouses, family homes, and most noted is the guardhouse that contains the payroll for the Northern Pacific. Now, the railroad company warehouse and company freight office, both are buildings that disappear into the waterfront out here, and with them goes the company payroll. With the Knights Guardsman, a guy named Hansen, inside when the building disappears into Commencement Bay. Not too far away, another building with an entire family inside actually disappears into Commencement Bay, and inside a young 14-year-old girl, Emma Stubbs, goes down with the house. The rest of the family manages to escape, but she is actually trapped inside the building as it's sucked underwater, and that entire strip of shoreline just within a moment, within an instant, disappears into the waters of Commencement Bay, where the majority of it remains. Now, the two experiences that were most noted about this, number one, was the fact that this young girl, Emma Stubbs, drowns inside her home and her body is never recovered. She is never found again, and nobody even knows where that particular home disappeared into the water of Commencement Bay. But the bigger mystery that people have been chasing is that the entire guardhouse with a safe inside and the night guardsman Hansen disappears into the water, and then part of the guardhouse washes up on shore in Quartermaster Harbor. Hansen's body isn't discovered until several weeks later, and the safe is never recovered. They end up finding Hansen through the efforts of a diver 6 months after, and young Emma is never recovered. They never find her. But the safe becomes the biggest mystery of this entire event, because the Northern Pacific Railroad has such a vested interest in finding the safe because it was entirely filled with payroll for the company in the coming month. And they want to find it. So they bring this diver in who's going to work just looking for various artifacts down there, but in particular, the safe. And because the efforts take, as you can see from the article there, up to 6 months, they end up keeping this guy on the payroll, and he just becomes the hard hat diver that looks for artifacts lost for the railroad. While he's looking for the safe, they find that that entire section of the guardhouse just completely is gone. And while a large portion of it washes back up in Quartermaster Harbor all the way over in Vashon, a significant distance away from where it disappears at essentially the north end of the Foss Waterway, they never find the safe, and they never find the part of the guardhouse that it was attached to. $14,000 inside the safe. It becomes, especially in 1894, a big thing that people start looking for. And it doesn't just stop there, because the diver that's on payroll ends up dying mysteriously. We'll get into that in a moment. But the shoreline where this disappears starts to change, and it becomes an area where people, enter Robert Mester, start to look for the safe. So here's Robert's account of the whole thing.
And everyone's always wondered about that safe. It was never found. There was a diver that was hired that later died on the Andalana while trying to get that salvage together, who worked a couple of years looking for this safe. So the railroad company was very eager to get it back. So while side scan sonaring along Western Way, I came across this really strange looking square rectangular object that immediately caught my attention. And I said, wow, that's about the dimension of a safe. So we dropped in, and lo and behold, it's a safe. It's down by where the lobster shop is located, not too far off from that facility. Immediately when I saw the safe, I realized it was not the safe from the event that occurred from the railway with the slide on the hillside in Tacoma, but still a safe nonetheless. And so what's inside the safe? The safe was sealed. And it looked like somebody had attempted to maybe cut into the top, but unsuccessfully. So, of course, what needed to be done? Well, a very good friend of mine involved in some projects, the late Mr. John Dimmer, owned a machine shop, and we partnered up and went out, and I pulled the safe up and took it down to a machine shop in the Tide Flats. And we spent most of the day trying to get it open. Finally had to throw it up on a big giant mill and break it open. And there was a lot of excitement and tension about what might be in the safe. And I learned a lot about safes and safe robbers because the safe had been successfully opened, and we found 1 penny inside the safe. So we cut the penny in half, and John got half and I got half, and it's on my office wall right now. So the safe was something that somebody had stolen, somehow got it out into the water off the shoreline there near the lobster shop restaurant and dumped it. But they shut the door and sealed it, so that we went through all this trouble. And I found out later that that's very common for safe crackers it's a sign of their trade to leave a penny in after they finish opening the safe to show they were there.
So many more questions are brought up by this incident than were ever going to be answered. So first of all, yes, that is the same Robert Mester who was talking about the U.S. governor, a shipwreck off of the Port Townsend area. That's a phenomenal virtual program we have as well. But Robert is a finder of lost things, and this safe ends up becoming one of those very things. And it's not the safe. The safe that was lost by the Northern Pacific Railroad Company with the $14,000 inside remains at large somewhere in Commencement Bay today. But adding additional questions to this whole thing, they find another safe of a similar dimension that had been tossed into Commencement Bay. Not only had it been removed from its location and tossed into Commencement Bay, but somebody had successfully broken into it, robbed it, and left a single penny as a calling card before it gets dumped into Commencement Bay. And that is about where my knowledge of the entire enterprise ends, because best as I can tell, there was a series of safe robberies in the late 20s, early 30s in Tacoma, where people were using nitroglycerin to blow into safes and then try and steal money. Those guys never get caught. No one ever gets apprehended for this string of safe robberies. But this doesn't even fit the same MO. A professional with the skill to crack a safe broke into this one that we don't know where it came from, robbed it of what we don't know, and then left a single penny inside. So it remains one of the great unsolved mysteries, not just of Commencement Bay, but of my life. If anybody knows anyone in the area who is missing a safe, please let me know, because I'm intensely curious to know more about it. But you might be asking, what about the safe for the railroad? Well, Bob has a theory.
You know, your heart and your mind and your pocketbook race when you think maybe the possibilities. And on this particular one, it was a penny, but the adventure was worth $1 million. The truth is, the safe, the whole front waterway has changed since they put the highway in. If you go down the Rustway, you can see the original train used to come around through the tunnel over by Point Defiance and makes a turn, and the old pilings for the railroad that went up actually onto the dock, the wharf that now is no longer there. You can still see some of the remnants as you drive along down by I think it's the one hotel down by the seafood market. That has been filled in for the road that you now drive on. So I believe it's covered up with the reclamation of the shoreline to build the road.
So I've got some great pictures that Robert sent over of the actual discovery of the safe. So after they found it with side scan sonar, they uncover it. First of all, it should also be noted, Robert Mester is like absolutely a hero of mine. This guy is so freaking awesome. He Zoom called in while doing salvage of a boat that caught on fire out in the Dalles, and he sends me these photos. So this is him underwater with a Bowie knife digging a safe out of the bottom of Commencement Bay because he's awesome. They end up roping this thing up. They bring it up, and just like he said, they take it down to a local machine shop out on the tide flats where Port of Tacoma is. And this is the location where they found it, basically right underneath the lobster shop today. They bring it up on this platform, trying to figure out how to get inside of it. And eventually they make the decision that they're just going to take this industrial mill and essentially drill into the side of this massive safe. And after they get inside here through several inches of high-grade steel, the only thing they find is a single penny, only enriching further the mystery out here on Commencement Bay. So there they are with their pennies cut in half, I believe now framed in their office today. It's one of many mysteries because that whole area actually contains a treasure trove of lost and misunderstood artifacts, because the area where Chinese Reconciliation Park is today was actually part of the original Tacoma Chinatown, which, as you probably know, on November 3rd, 1885, the townspeople of Tacoma, led by the mayor, went down to Chinatown, rounded up everyone at gunpoint, forced them out of the city, and burned everything to the ground. And a big portion of that Chinatown was actually on pilings and docks that were completely destroyed in the fire. And so much of that sank into the area. And then over the years, through earthquakes and terraforming, it has been reclaimed and is now part of either the old town sort of Ruston Way Park system or where 705 is today. And of the various things that are down there that have been sealed up and forgotten, not only Chinatown, but a huge amount of that original maritime history. What's puzzling is that going through the articles of that original landslide, I was first told that it was an earthquake that had destroyed that section of the waterfront down there, claiming both the lives of the guardsman Hansen and of that young girl, Emma Stubbs. But when you go back through the articles, there is no record of there being an earthquake at that time. And a lot of speculation actually goes around as to what could have actually caused the landslide. A lot of people think that it may have been poor engineering on the part of the railroad. And some other accounts actually attribute it to what's described as a tidal wave coming in the middle of the night, hitting the shore so forcefully that several hundred yards of it disappeared into the waterfront. We may never know, but what we can say definitively is that several artifacts like that safe disappeared into the waterfront where they are today. Which brings me to our next mystery, and certainly one of the most puzzling of them. It takes place in April of 1971 when a group with 7 students, 6 young men and 1 young woman, get onto a small sailboat off of the Tacoma Yacht Club, and they're going to go for a little pleasure cruise at night. They sail from the Tacoma Yacht Club on Wednesday, April 14th at 9:30, and then are just never heard from again. The students are Barbara Cormorek, 22, studying at Columbia Basin Community College in my hometown of Pasco, Jim Dickinson of WSU, Gary Oman of WSU, Brian Williams of WSU, the Tacoma native and the owner of the sailboat that they take out, and then Brian Wilson, also of WSU, and Robert Sherwood, WSU. The last student on board this vessel was a young man by the name of Dennis Newton out of Lewis and Clark School in Idaho. And all of them are historians for the Intercollegiate Knights. and they had come to Seattle to attend this convention. And one of them, probably Brian, recommends that they should go for like a pleasure sail to come see the area, and he owns the boat. So they go out on Commencement Bay, and they're planning to see Dulco Passage, south of Vashon Island, and maybe, possibly, all the way up to Seattle. And then that night, they vanish. And this becomes one of the largest search and rescue missions and manhunts in Commencement Bay. Not only does the Coast Guard get involved, first starting here at the Tacoma Yacht Club in the 1970s, but then throughout the greater Puget Sound. Coast Guard, FBI, local authorities, every agency that people can bring to bear show up out here with boats, with sonar, with helicopters, with dogs. And so many theories start to percolate in the area as to what could have possibly happened to these students. Some things that first go out there is that possibly they ran away, that they were trying to escape from something, and so that they took the sailboat all the way through Puget Sound up into Canada and then fled and vanished into the wind. Another popular theory is that they actually went south down along the coast of Washington, and then all the way into California, and then eventually Mexico. And bear in mind here, they weren't in like an ocean-going vessel. They're in a 22-foot Catalina, which has like a single berth up on the bow there, and really is just designed for like a little bit of pleasure sailing. This is not an ocean-going vessel whatsoever. But still, the theory starts to gain traction for a lot of people because there is a rumor at one point that they actually end up down in Hoquiam. That some people see them, and so the Coast Guard goes down to investigate and never finds anything down there. But what makes it so particularly strange for me is that nothing, literally nothing, is ever recovered. And to put this in context for you, of the various shipwrecks or accidents or deaths that have happened on Commencement Bay, literally every single one of them has left some remnant, some trace. To give you two examples of this, anytime that there's been a boating accident or a fatality or a shipwreck on Commencement Bay, something has floated to the surface. There's been some clue or remnant. Or we know where the wreck is. Of the, I think, over 40 known shipwrecks in Commencement Bay, all of them are known and accounted for. We know their position except for two. It's the Missing Seven here and the Andalana. And the Andalana, while we don't know the location today, parts of it did float back up to the surface. This is an anomaly in every possible way, and that none of them were ever found. Nobody ever floated up to the surface. And of the 40 known flotation devices, things on board this 22-foot sailboat, nothing ever floated to the surface. Completely vanished without a trace from the 1970s to today. So Bob has actually gone down and done sonar attempts and tried to find this particular sailboat, and no part of it has been recovered. In May, 1 month after the disappearance, Gene Dixon, a popular psychic from the Washington, D.C. area, is brought in to search for the victims of this particular sailboat accident. And the group, the parents of this group, had consulted with a mixed reception to various spiritualists or psychics in the Tacoma area. But Gene Dixon becomes the most famous one called out to find these 7 missing kids on the 22-foot boat. And Gene Dixon is perhaps the most famous of the seers because she accurately predicts, I think even to the day, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. So she offers her help to the family of Brian Williams, comes out to the area, and starts to look for answers. And she has a lot of predictions or beliefs that they are still alive and that they are somewhere in the area. nothing conclusive ever comes of this, and the search continues throughout the area. But again, nothing's ever been found. The most popular theory as of today in 2021, it comes from a retired tugboat operator, that the sailboat may have capsized and then been snared along with the entirety of the crew by a passing log boom and then sucked underwater. What it doesn't account for, though, is the fact that nothing has ever been found from them. Reports from Dash Point, actually, near Tacoma, were that an SOS was flashed at night around the same time that this sailboat would have disappeared. And one man claims that he reported the signal to a local volunteer fire department to pass on to the Coast Guard, but the Coast Guard never has any record of receiving this report. Over the years, people have led independent and professional searches out there to try and find this group, but nothing's ever been turned up. Today, the only account that anyone really gave any credence to was of a local fisherman in the Gig Harbor area who snared a sailboat of a similar description down at the bottom of the Narrows in his fishing net, and he hauled the wreck closer to Gig Harbor out of the way so that it wouldn't be snared by additional fishing nets. But it ends up not matching the same description as the sailboat that's lost. Bob has something to say about it.
We actually went out and looked at a place where, oh boy, in 1994, 1997, sonar survey showed a sailboat off the west coast of Andalana Island, western side, and there was nothing there at the time, but there was a reported incident where a dragger fisherman out of Gig Harbor had drug into something and pulled it over to the shore and got it out of the way for future drags so that they didn't tangle up. And they believe that probably was the sailboat. But once again, the current storms and the time that's gone by probably became dislodged where it was and was moved. I did quite a bit of research actually and contacted some of the relatives. And so many projects just right here in Commencement Bay have come up that I have about more than I'll ever handle in my lifetime. So I haven't continued to pursue that anymore because the idea and location that I had to go and look, we've checked out thoroughly with the museum, I might add, and it turned up nothing there. One of those that we may never find out, but the fact is the boat is still somewhere. Someday, more likely than not, somehow, somewhere, someone will see those remains as technology becomes more sophisticated. The boat remains.
It's, for me, one of the more tragic and sad mysteries of Commencement Bay, because there's never been any closure for any of these families. The 7 students disappear in an instant. What was supposed to just be a fun pleasure sail for the evening on a 22-foot boat turns into one of the most lingering and tragic stories in the area. And again, the thing for me that seems so incredibly strange about it, just especially having done hours of research on shipwrecks and tragedies in the greater waters of the Pacific, to never have anything recovered or found is absolutely unbelievable. Never anything. Because I don't even know how to put that in context entirely. They've been able to chart and find every fiberglass or metal shipwreck throughout the area. We know where almost everything is, and little pieces show up all the time. The currents are fairly predictable, and so you're able to recover items throughout the area all the time. And to just never have anything is so incredibly bizarre. The safe that I mentioned earlier, the safe for the Northern Pacific Railroad, ends up becoming a longer standing mystery in the area. And Bob will tell you a little bit about that. Thank you, Bob.
It was the son of the person that actually died. It was a guard. He was a dentist that lived near Day Island. I lived on Day Island. And he has a bunch of material on the event. And it was a large enough amount that they hired this diver, and after a few months, they actually put him on the payroll to keep him there. And then later he died in an incident on the Andalana.
Turn off the fog machine really quick. So this guard, Hansen, his son ends up preserving the vast majority of news articles that we end up looking into to look about this safe. And that's where some of the most detailed accounts about the diver show up. Because when we're talking about unsolved mysteries in Commencement Bay, I have to talk about the Andalana. And I can't get over this. This is, I always go back and forth. I feel like I talk about the Andalana all the time, but it's such a strange story. We're going to talk about it again. So if by some miracle you've never heard this story, let me illuminate you. A British vessel sails all around the world. Their final port is Shanghai, and then they're going to come over here to Tacoma. They arrive to Tacoma, they offload all their cargo. They're waiting to take on new cargo the next day. And then on Friday the 13th, January 1899, this vessel, with everyone in this picture, except for one person, flips over. The only vessel anchored out in Commencement Bay that flips over, disappears, sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and then vanishes. And there's so many things to unpack about this. Number one, the Andalana turning over, the only vessel to turn over. There are working theories about how this could have possibly happened, but it is the only one anchored out there that disappears. And the more you dig into the story of the Andalana, the weirder it gets, because the captain, George Stalling, who is pictured here, front row, second in from the left, is locking the crew up at night because the Andalana had earned a reputation for being a cursed ship. And so the captain is locking the crew up at night to prevent them from escaping. While he's doing this, the ship turns over. Everyone is sealed up on board, and it vanishes from thought and memory until, of course, a large collection of letters for a particular sailor by the name of Andrew Hansen shows up on my radar. Now, Andrew Hansen is bottom row all the way to the left there. And as a good, dutiful son, he writes home every day to his family. And this massive collection of letters ends up going to a maritime museum in Belgium. And the thing that I thought was so remarkable about it is that he has a detailed account of when in Shanghai, he goes to visit a fortune teller who confirms his suspicion that the Andalana is cursed and sells him this magic talisman pictured here, promising Richard that as long as he keeps it on him, nothing bad will ever happen to him. Fast forward to the Andalana arriving in Commencement Bay, where this home pictured here, this is still in Old Town Tacoma, by the way. This home is now a private residence, but at the time, it was a boarding house called Seaman's Rest. And the woman that runs this is good friends with Captain George Stalling, and she invites him to come have dinner that night. And he refuses. He says, I can't leave the crew. They're already mutinous. I have to lock them up tonight. And so he sends one young sailor to go ashore, a guy named Percy Buck. Now, Percy Buck arrives here at Seaman's Rest and then basically passes out. They send him to the hospital where they find out he has an abscessed tooth that's caused an infection that's created a great deal of pain and causing him to pass out. They remove the tooth. He goes back to the Andalana in the morning only to discover that it's vanished. Now, here's where it gets super weird. He, in his haste to leave the ship and go and give the captain's apologies to Catherine Funark, who works at Seaman's Rest here, takes not his jacket, but his buddy's jacket. He ends up taking Richard Hans's jacket, and while he's staying at Seaman's Rest, trying to figure out what he's going to do with his life, he uncovers this talisman in the pocket of that jacket. The magic talisman, supposed to protect anyone from dying at sea, ends up in Percy Buck's possession, where, of course, he is the last survivor of the Andalana. The ship is so remarkably weird. And the fact that all of this is just part of the iceberg is one thing, but the ship itself remains a mystery. Every time that a diver has uncovered a piece of the Andalana, they've died. And then the ship just disappears and nobody knows where it is. So I was asking Bob, I was like, what is the most mysterious thing that you've uncovered in Commencement Bay? And this was his answer.
Well, the Andalana is still one of the biggest mysteries for me. And as I've researched, thanks to you and the museum, even more, and looked and talked to people in Belgium and other locations in the world where there's information and the story unfolds more and more, and learning about how this tragedy occurred, resulting in these deaths, because the captain actually had the crew locked into the vessel below deck, and the history and the reasons that occurred. That's still probably the most exciting mystery in the water there.
Okay, so first I want to take a second to address some questions. In brief, the dentist, I actually only know that his last name was Hansen. I don't know his first name, but he was the son of this guardsman Hansen who died in the landslide in 1893. Also, iron. It was an iron-hulled ship, the Andalana, 300-foot, 4-masted, iron-hulled ship. And Bob is pretty confident that he's uncovered the location for a sonar because it's the only 300-foot iron shape down at the bottom of Commencement Bay. But it's even weirder because it's not even close to the location that it's been reported on various occasions. It's very strange. Yes. I can't get fully into the Andalana because it freaks me out, and so many things that have happened about it continue to haunt me to this day. But suffice to say, the ship disappears and it's down there today, and Bob continues to be intrigued by it, and I'll let him tell you in his own words.
Well, beyond, because the ships carries the ship's money, that creates money. It won't be a lot of money, but this is a complete vessel of the era in a metal ship hull filled with silt. So everything was inside, still there. It's not been strewn around, lost, or it's not been stolen. It's not been scavenged. So the remains and everything it took for this ship to exist at sea in this period of time is in this vessel. It's in the hull. And it would be remarkable to get that to the surface and just really bring back for everybody to see what were the conditions and what it took to survive at sea. One of the most important advances in our nation was the maritime history. It was a wonderful preserved capsule sitting right off Tacoma's waterfront.
Yeah, but you're gonna die. Here's my thing about the Andalana. I agree 100% with everything that Bob just said. I do think it's one of the most important artifacts lost in Commencement Bay, perhaps Puget Sound, ever. And as a perfectly preserved time capsule to teach us about the time period that it comes from, 100%. As an innate death trap, don't touch it. Leave it alone. Everyone that was on board drowned. Everyone, like this gentleman here who puts on the hard hat, dives to the bottom to go touch it, dead. Everyone who goes looking for it, dead. Leave it alone. It's a mystery that doesn't need to be exhumed from the bottom of the bay. That's just my professional opinion. Let's talk briefly about one of the most, I hope, famous incidents of Commencement Bay, and certainly, in my opinion, an unsolved mystery. The Maury Island incident. So in the summer of 1947, off the coast of Maury Island, which is just next to Vashon, a man named Harold Dahl was out on his boat with his son Christopher, their dog, and 2 workers. And their big job was to collect logs logs that had gone astray in Puget Sound or Commencement Bay. They would wrestle up these logs, bring them back, and then resell them to the lumber companies that had lost them. Brilliant move. But on this particular evening, Harold says that he observed 6 donut-shaped flying entities rise up over Commencement Bay, and that one of them looked like it was wounded or hurt or something was off with it. So they're already awestruck by this particular flying object until that one that looks like it's sort of just off starts spewing what they describe as pieces of paper flying through the air. And that as they drift down, they end up being molten, searing hot pieces of refuse spewed out across Commencement Bay. And that it not only burns his son, Christopher's arm, but kills their dog. Okay, right? Stay with me here, because this happens in the summer of 1947. And then it's almost paralleled to the same time that the first account of a flying saucer, literally the first time that a flying saucer, an unidentified flying object, shows up into the consciousness of the United States, when a pilot by the name of Kenneth Arnold in June of 1947 alleges that he saw 8 unidentified flying objects near Mount Rainier. Okay, so here we go. It's about to get very, very strange. Kenneth Arnold gets intrigued by the account that ends up trickling to him about Dahl's account of seeing these unidentified flying objects. And so he hires an investigative team to come out and sort of question Dahl about what he saw. And the account ends up going that when Dahl first reported this, a mysterious man dressed in a black suit shows up, takes him out to a diner, and essentially says, "Hey, stop talking about this. I know what you saw. I know that it's real. You need to never discuss it again. Sorry about your dog. Everything's done." Enter Kenneth Arnold here. And the 2 investigative specialists that he calls in are U.S. Army investigators who follow up on this report about the UFO. They go and they talk to Dahl. They record the report that they take down and take a box of evidence, which was essentially stuff that Dahl had picked up off of the shores of Maury Island after these unidentified flying objects come around. They load up everything. They submit their report. They take the box of evidence. They get into a B-25, and then they take off. And as they're flying away on August 1st, 1947, from Tacoma to San Francisco, something goes wrong on the plane, and it crashes. And these 2 investigators, the pilots of the B-25, die. Okay, now we're getting to the real weirdness. After that, the FBI immediately begins an investigation into the whole thing. They go to talk to Dahl here in the Tacoma area, and Dahl now has a completely different story. He says that he fabricated the whole flying saucer thing, that the debris that he sent with these 2 investigators was just bits of scrap and pumice from the Maury Island beach, and that he was just looking to get famous, and that nothing meant anything. He just made it up. He feels very, very bad. But some things that we know for sure. Number 1, when these 2 pilots go down, it is right after the U.S. Air Force becomes an independent branch. It's the first time that the Air Corps isn't just a part of the Army, but it's its own incident. So it shows up on record because their death is the first casualty for the U.S. Air Force. The other thing is that other people on board the plane managed to parachute to safety. It's only the 2 pilots that die. And conspiracy theories have abounded about the fact that this was an intentional job, that something either shot down that plane or that it was sabotaged, and that the evidence that they had was destroyed. But their account from Dahl still exists. And their account of what he said about the man in a black suit showing up and talking to him becomes the first recorded time that Men in Black is mentioned ever in the consciousness of the world. So, while he ends up changing his story and saying that he fabricated the whole thing for fame, you can go so many ways with this. The first thing is what we know. It is the first casualty of the U.S. Air Force. It is the first time that Men in Black are recorded, and it is the second occurrence of an unidentified flying object being in the area. And in fact, this investigation becomes the first time that UFO, unidentified flying object, enters the lexicon, because that incident around Mount Rainier and then again on Commencement Bay in 1947 are the first time that something like this shows up. And as it becomes more popular with Roswell and science fiction novels, it sort of just becomes a thing. But the origin is here in Tacoma. And while Dahl ends up changing his story, the incident has never been proven or disproven one way or the other. It's all hearsay. Either he says that he did it or he says that he didn't, but no one has been able to prove definitively one way or the other whether or not the first visitation of extraterrestrial life begins here in Commencement Bay. It is an interesting story, to say the least. I think the true diehards about UFO activity would have significantly more to say about it, but it's my job to introduce you to the fact. If you weren't aware of the Maury Island incident, continue to look into it. I believe there was just recently produced a new sort of indie film about the whole thing. But claim to fame still happens here in Tacoma. So if we're talking about great mysteries, I want to turn it over to the man who spent the majority of his life underwater, Robert Mester.
There are many things I've found I can't explain. There's been a couple instances where we've had some strange lights come up on us while diving out of Point Defiance, but I'm not quite sure what to think of that. Now, submarines for the United States do go back and forth through the straits. They used to, the Tacoma Narrows. They had a testing range back there, but that's been since closed. Probably one of the most interesting things was near Point Defiance in the Current. This is many years ago. We've been diving and we looked over in the middle of the channel, and here was a black pipe that came up at a 90-degree. It was jet black, traveling along in the current, and it had a red Russian communist star painted on it. And I thought, Jesus, this couldn't be a Russian submarine. So we raced over, and lo and behold, somebody pulled a gag. They took a piece of PVC black pipe, weighted it, put the star through the current. We fell for that one. That was pretty funny.
I love so much of that story. One, thank you, Tacoma, for someone being like, you know what would be awesome? What if we throw this mock Russian sub into the water? I'm sure someone will find that. Secondly, that Bob's impulse while down there was like, you know what? We should go chase this sucker down. True American hero. Talking a little more about mysteries in the area, though, Bob did bring up, I think, something both very topical and honestly pretty mysterious. You may be familiar with this, but let me introduce you. I'm deadly serious about this. The beluga whale, if you haven't somehow already encountered it in the news, there has been a beluga whale very recently this month spotted in Puget Sound, and it is well outside of the territory of all beluga whales. They're normally only up in the northern realms, up in the Arctic up there. I'll let Bob introduce the topic before I jump into it.
Well, there's been some other interesting things happen recently. The sighting of a beluga whale in Commencement Bay is very mysterious. It's sad to see that because they shouldn't be down this far north. Having spent quite a bit of time with belugas in the Point Defiance system that they had, where they kept them for a while on display for the public, they're just not used to being this far south. So that means their food sources are getting less, and the stronger of the packs are traveling to try to find other sources, and it's sad to see that. Beautiful, beautiful.
And it's true. The world is changing, and of the mysterious things that happen out here, I think it's often easy to get wrapped up in those ones that are paranormal and miraculous, like a 300-foot ship disappearing in the night without explanation, or of 7 students disappearing without a trace. But I think when we're looking around the world, it's always good to take note of the things that might seem... That turned on by itself right at the right time. That might seem like nothing at first, but the appearance of a beluga whale in Puget Sound is remarkable and certainly beyond explanation at this current juncture in time. So, as you go out into the world, I would encourage you guys to remain curious, to remain alert, and to never take anything at face value, because so many of the stories that we get told out here in Puget Sound usually have something deeper to them that require just a little bit more investigation to fully flesh out. That said, if you've enjoyed your time tonight and you'd like to tip your guide, you can always do so either with the QR code right here or at prettygrittytours.com. Absolutely unnecessary, but if you want to, we always appreciate it. I hope you guys have been inspired tonight. I hope that you continue your own investigations out there and you share those stories with us, because at the end of the day, the Foss Waterway Seaport and those of us here at Pretty Gritty Tours are just obsessed with finding stories and making sure that they survive the ages, because of course, the truth is out there. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. We're always happy to answer them. But until next time, which for the Foss Seaport, it's next month, we are going to do our first hybrid virtual in-person event. We will be broadcasting it online, but it will be an in-person event at the Foss Waterway Seaport on the 3rd Thursday, where it's going to be a very cool event. They've got diving into history down there. And in fact, my man, Robert Mester, will be down there with actual treasure that he's brought up from various shipwrecks in the area, talking about anything that you want to ask him. There will be games, activities. It is an adults only event. So look forward to some excitement. Again, first Thursday or 3rd Thursday in November. I'm sure I'll see you guys there. Thank you for joining me tonight. And hey, keep on exploring. I'll see you soon.